Hi, in this video we're going to talk about the exciting world of functions. The whole fun of programming is using functions to define a certain thing we want to do and then have that function do it each time when we want to do it. So that way I don't have to write the same loop or the same definition or the same save to a database. Whatever, I have a function that I define once and then I call that function and it does that thing each time I call it. So let's look at some basic syntax. Say I have a greeting function that I want to greet a user as he or she comes into my website. So I'll define it much like I define a normal variable, const greet equals, and then I use this function keyword. So greet is the name of my function, just like a normal variable. And then I say it's a function, and then I open up curly braces, like in ifs, fors, whiles. These curly braces typically mean some code block. Alright, so in here, I will say something like this. Console log, hello. Great, let's save this, open up our browser, refresh the page, and nothing happens. Nothing happens because a function in and of itself does not do anything. In fact, a function is useless unless we call it. So let's call the function. And this is how we call a function. We use its name, so the name is important. And then we use these parentheses, which is the invocation of the function. So if I save that, refresh the page, I've seen my hello, and I'm really happy about that. Now, here's the thing. Anything that exists inside of the function does not exist outside of it. We won't go into great detail about this, but say I define this variable x, and that's going to be 31. If I do console log x here, no problem. But if I try to do console log x here, after I call the function, or actually before, it doesn't matter. In fact, let's do it before. Let's see what happens when I refresh. Uncut reference error, x is not defined. Even though you'll notice I've defined my function and inside of it I have an x, but here I cannot use x. And that's because x only exists in this world. So if I remove this and then I refresh, then that's great. Now I have printed it because inside the function, that's fine, x exists. Notice that I can't even do it over here. Sorry about that. Console log x. Even though I've called the function, so it kind of I've made it exist, so I'll see the 31 because the greet function runs first, but then I still get this uncut error. That's because again, outside of the function, the x does not exist. Okay, this is one way to define functions, and it's my personal preferred way, but also I think it's much better practice and you can read yourself about the difference. But another way we could define this function is like this. Function greet, and let's hide that so we don't get confused, and I'll just say console log hi. I'm invoking it the exact same way. I use the name and then I use the parentheses to invoke it, but I haven't had to do all that const equals stuff. This is called a function declaration, whereas this is called a function expression. Function declaration, if I refresh, it works, no problem. The main difference is that this I can call wherever. So I can put the greet even before I've actually defined the function, and I refresh the page and I still see that hi. And that's because JavaScript does something called hoisting, which means it'll take this guy, or once it reads the file once, and then it'll take all function declarations and bring them to the top of the file. So because I've written my function like this, it is as if I had written my function up here. On the other hand, with function expressions, if I try to call the function before I define it, and then refresh, uncut reference, greet is not defined. And that's true, because in this case, I'm calling greet before I define it. There is no hoisting here. JavaScript does not take this function and put it anywhere else. It's just a normal variable. That's why it's called a function expression. So that's the difference between those two. Now this function is pretty boring in terms of its greeting capacity. It can only say hi, which is not so fun. So change that back to whatever it was, hello. Again, pretty boring function, only does one thing each time. Now I want to make it more dynamic. I want it to greet whoever I ask it to greet. So I'll put in some placeholder variable here, and then I'll say hello plus name. And I almost spelled that right. So now what I'm saying is, whenever I call the function, I'm going to expect to receive some parameter. This is called a parameter. And then I can use that parameter anywhere inside the function. So if I save this and refresh, I'll see hello undefined. Why? Because I have not defined a name. Where should I define that name? In the function call. So here, if I write in something like Reginald, so here I'm saying greet Reginald. And what that's going to do is it's going to take this string, put it inside of this variable, and then use that variable however you want inside the function. If I refresh, hello Reginald. Now, of course, I'm not limited to strings. I can put whatever I want in here, so long as I use it accordingly. So if I greet 1, 2, 3, 4, hello 1, 2, 3, 4. This name doesn't matter at all, so long as it is consistent with whatever is inside of here. Okay, that's important. I could have called this fad with 2 D's and then use that like this, and it would still work. Refresh, and there you go. That's because this is just a placeholder to be used inside the function. That said, these two do need to match. If I did something like this, even though it makes sense, and I refresh, I'll only see hello, because name doesn't have any type of definition within this function. So there is no 1, 2, 3, 4. Even if I had a string here and I refreshed, still nothing, just that hello. Cool, so that's in terms of parameters. This is called the parameter, this is called the argument. You pass in arguments. Of course, I can have multiple arguments. And I add one like this, and then I can use that in a separate line. You are age years old, which I'm sure is a very useful greeting. And then likewise here, I pass in the arguments comma separated. Reginald is going to be 43 years old. And when I run that, hello Reginald, you are 43 years old. No problem, more than one parameter, more than one argument, totally legal, totally useful. The next thing, and maybe one of the most important things about functions, is that they can not only do things for me, they can return things for me. So let's say I had a calculate sum method, function, and it receives number, the first number and the second number, and what I wanted to do is add these two together. No problem. But now I want to see that result. But more specifically, well, okay, let's see. If I call calculate sum and I give it 7 and 2, okay, I should see 9. Of course, I see nothing. If I console log this, that's great. I'll see it in the console, but that's not really interesting to me because I want to use this sum, right? I want to say something like this. I want to say const sum equals calculate sum. And then I want to use some, let's say I want to console log the sum plus 100 for whatever reason. Now I'm just going to get nan, not a number. Why? Because if I console log just sum, we will see that it's undefined. Why? Because I haven't told this function to give me anything in return. So now instead of doing a console log, what I'll do is return. Now return is a reserved keyword, meaning it's given to us by JavaScript, and what it says is take whatever's on in this line and give it back to whoever's calling the function. In this case, we can say that this variable is calling the function. This is the function call. It receives its 2 arguments, and whatever this function outputs will go into this variable. So now if I console log sum, I will see 9, and I can now do my sum plus 100, and there it is, 109. So this is very useful stuff. The return is a must if you want to do something like this. And I think that's it about returns. The next thing and the last thing about functions is, if you recall, working with objects, I can define, let's say we have a person object, and it's going to have a name, and that name is going to be Arnold. And now we can introduce a new concept called methods. A method is just another key, but its value can be a function. Oh, cool. And here I can do anything I would do in a regular function, like say hello. And then I would do something like this. So if I say console log person.name, just sanity check, see that everything works. There's Arnold, that's great. If I console log person.speak, look at that. It tells me it's a function, and it actually gives me the whole function definition, but it doesn't actually invoke the function. What I want to do is, just like a normal function, use these parentheses. And now this, strictly speaking, is not a function. It's called a method. All right, but it acts pretty much the same way as a function, except a method is a function that is inside of an object. So now I don't need this console log, because speak already console logs for me. And if I do person.speak, invoke that, refresh, I see the hello. So that's a brief introduction into functions. Again, use them to modularize your code, meaning create functions that do small, simple things, and then use those functions over and over again whenever you need it. Enjoy that.